Good morning, everyone. This is Matt Hughes with Interworks, and I'm filling in today for Sean while he's out of the office. So I apologize, but we're going to be a little bit light on the actual user group updates because I do think we have some news coming around. New folks participating in the user group in the kind of upcoming topics. So there's an upcoming email coming about that. I apologize that I don't have more updates for you. But what I am happy to do is to talk more today around, well, a problem that we see quite a bit whenever we're developing dashboards for projects, and especially whenever we're kind of taking a step back and looking at the large amount of dashboards that have been developed over time and the ones that provided benefit to organizations versus the ones that didn't as much. And I think we found a few things whenever we did that. One of the things that we found, though, is that while there's a huge amount of importance placed on, in the data visualization world, on things like chart types and conveying numeric information using pre-attentive attributes that all of us are aware of, there was a whole really realm of things that we don't talk about as much, things around user interaction, around interface, and really around everything that leads to a cohesive experience that helps analysts answer questions better or faster in ways that lead to better understanding. So because of that, that's one reason why I'm really excited to have David Duncan from our experience team back here to present to the user group a topic that I think we've presented on before, but has actually evolved over time pretty significantly. So this is a talk that we typically refer to as designing for data. I think David can speak a lot more to the principles involved, but I think that if you spend a lot of time thinking about what visualization types you should be using, but you sometimes struggle with how to combine visualization types into really decision support tools in the form of dashboards, I think this talk is extremely helpful. So my dogs also say hi. I'll shut up and turn this over to David. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. Welcome to Designing for Data. Quick intro of myself is I've been with Interworks for about 8 years. I started on the marketing team, and I was really hired on to boost our brand and kind of evolve some of our brand assets. But as I got closer to the company, I realized there was a huge need for kind of stepping in to, we were turning out things that had data in them, but I didn't feel like there was necessarily a design component to it. And so really early on, all that the gist of what I do at Interworks is take something like what you see on the left and end up with something you see on the right. At a very high level, all we're really getting at is more consistent use of design. So that comes across in how we treat different visualizations, the titles on each chart, the iconography that goes with it, and how this stuff is displayed so that it is easier to understand and you're not left dealing with some of these more frustrating default settings that Tableau might throw at you. But to set the stage appropriately, I have to make some things clear. And that is, first and foremost, I design outside of Tableau. So I love Tableau. I think it's great. And I definitely rely on knowing what Tableau can and can't do, and knowing what Tableau does best and not that great. But I think stepping outside of that environment and designing outside of it first, either on paper by sketching it out or some of the other design tools that I'll get into, in my experience, this is what leads us to better solutions, because we don't have the Tableau blinders on. I'm not an analyst by day. I rely on my coworkers who are much better analysts than I am. So that's one key thing to understand. Also, everything that we talk about today applies to more than just dashboards. So if you get really bored talking about data in this conversation, just try to think about how these can apply to the next PowerPoint you create or the next email you write even. So lots of various design here. Yeah, so to kick things off, essentially what I've learned designing for data, coming from more of a print and web world, is these things that we do in Tableau, they have to, even outside of Tableau, really we're designing a user experience. We want to you know, put an idea out there, test it, and see what works before we really start the development process. So I show this at the start of this because this is kind of a good summary of what we do. We could make something that looks kind of cute and it fits the job, but in practice, it's painful and it's not what we wanted. So take this analogy, and that's what we're going to apply to our data scenario. You might also remember at the Oscars from 2017 when La La Land was announced as the best movie, which was not true. It was actually Moonlight, but the problem was that they had this card that was labeled wrong. And I tend to say that, you know, this is a design issue that could have saved everyone a ton of embarrassment and could have actually led to Moonlight getting its stage moment like it deserved. So how is this a design problem? Well, it's a design problem in that this card is awful and it's needed in a high intensity setting on stage in front of thousands of people watching. It should have been designed better. It should have had the category at the top. It should have had the title much bigger. The Oscars didn't even need to be written out. You're already sitting there at the Oscars. We know what we're watching. So, this takes into consideration some design principles like hierarchy and contrast to put the important information first and foremost. So yeah, when the first section of this talk is discussing how I approach designing for data. So what do I do before really kind of getting into it? Well, first off is you have to ask the right questions. So we need to understand the users, who's building it, and any sort of limitations we've got going on. So I ask primarily, who's going to be using this dashboard? Who's going to click around in it the most and know how it's built? What are the answers that we're looking for? Are these from high up at the CEO looking down, or are these answers that we might be putting out there just because we have the data and we're collecting it and we need a dashboard for it? And where do our current analytics fall short? Like, why are we integrating a powerful tool like Tableau? Is Excel not cutting it? Or is there some other tool that is kind of getting in the way of people understanding the data? Ask those questions, and then you kind of ask them again. So we know who's primarily using the dashboard. It could be CEOs, middle management, but I want to know also secondarily, who are the people that might come across this who might not be the absolute intended audience. And this is important because we need to design for the biggest audience in mind so that we can have a more inclusive dashboard that speaks to everyone. I know for my first several years at Interworks, I would come across dashboards and just have no clue what I was looking at because it wasn't designed for me. I get it. But there are always times that we need to think about what happens when we hire someone new or we bring someone else into the project or we need to hand it off to a consultant. There's a lot of loose ends that don't really get communicated very clearly. So I'm trying to get this whole picture here of who's going to be touching this thing. And then are we sure we're asking the right questions? We're not mapping data just because we have it. I sometimes try to remove columns of data if no one seems to be relying on it or making decisions based off of it, because sometimes those things can be distractions. And then what was it that made us integrate Tableau? I'm curious to see those shortcomings, because those are kind of what would highlight what I end up getting to focus on later in the project. Then we need to understand, is our data ready to go, and are our devices ready for this? So understanding where the data sources are they all cleaned? Are we ready to do anything with them, or are there going to be major headaches trying to get this piece of data to talk to this piece of data? If so, I need to understand that really early on so that I don't plan something that doesn't work. And then when we talk screen sizes, I'm primarily interested in knowing how big the monitor is, if the mobile or iPad approach is going to be crucial or not. Sometimes it's way more important than in other cases, i.e. a client just bought 1,000 iPads to give to their sales consultants, and so they're relying on Tableau functioning well in an iPad experience. Understanding that will change how buttons look, how charts are formatted, and the overall experience of how we jump between dashboards. And if we were designing for mobile, we have to take into consideration some other things, such as how are these dashboards going to reformat once they are on a slimmer screen. Usually in mobile, things are stacked on top of the other, one thing on top of the other. And so I'll get into it in a little bit, but I like to introduce my subject with a beginning and get into it with a middle and try to close it out with an end, meaning a call to action for the user. So you can kind of see that through here, like it gets very generic information up at the top, and then we slowly get into more advanced stuff with some actual charts, but much slimmer than we would do if we had a bigger screen. However, if we did have a big screen, but it wasn't plugged into a keyboard or a mouse, and it was rotating its imagery on a set timed interval, that would serve a different case. And we wouldn't have the same type of hierarchy going on a static dashboard. And so something like this might be in a conference room to stir conversation, to elevate and highlight some analytics that are normally tucked behind access gates. And we're now able to just kind of bring this data to a more general area like a conference room. Also important to define the story before we get into development. So trying to identify, how well our audience understands the subject matter, what we want them to do after they look at our dashboard, and then considering this beginning, middle, and an end. Be sure to introduce your content. So have links and resources of how people can learn more about what you're about to educate people on, and be on the hunt for any assumptions that you might have just because you've been very close to the project, or because you and your office spend all this time in it, that you don't understand that that's just your bubble and you're not really connecting with people outside of your bubble. Add prompts when we need to get someone to do something. Are we providing them links to, maybe we have a stepped process through a workflow, and maybe we can encourage them to just move right on to step 2 or step 3, because we can integrate the dashboard so well into their current workflow. And then considering, beginning, middle, and end, I do think of these things like stories, like who is the main character and who is the supporting cast? Because if we can, it's kind of just an easier way to break down what would normally be a more complex hierarchy of what do I want someone to pay attention to, and what are the things that are necessary to be on the sideline to kind of enhance and elevate that understanding. Some things that help, Matt mentioned this earlier, as our pre-attentive attributes. So we go with scale, and the length of a bar usually is one of the easiest ways to indicate get your attention. Secondly, below that would be the position of something, its relative position amongst a series of things. Color is a great way to catch someone's eye and get them to pay attention. the size of a mark can indicate, you know, the overall scale of it getting larger or bigger. Humans have a slightly hard time understanding volume of size, but that's why I traditionally just go with a single length because it's a line extending. And then our shapes being another way to indicate to someone what is happening. And so these types of, if we can, you know, use these tools to help us tell the story, then it's going to demystify what can sometimes be seen as really difficult. For instance, if we look at this, these 3 lines of data here on the left, some salaries and some employee names and some extraneous facts that have nothing to do with what we're looking for. And then you also look at the chart on the right, just because of that one bar being colored differently, the height of it being higher than anything else. This is the same information here, but it's cutting through the noise on the right. So we don't have to, you know, analyze extra columns that are not important to us, but we're driving the user to see what the trend is, to see what is happening in the data. These are the types of things that we're trying to employ to make our dashboards overall easier to understand and more accessible for everyone. Another important part before development is to get inspired and to go in with some ideas. So I recommend, you know, finding websites, apps that you like using and use on a daily basis, and figure out what they do well. Figure out, you know, is it their alert systems? Is it their menus? Or is it the kind of invisible hierarchy that you like? You know, spend some time thinking about how these apps are organized and see what kind of lessons you could learn from them to bring into your dashboard environment. I recommend going to behance.net, which is where I have my personal portfolio, and there's an interactive tab there. So 99% of these things have nothing to do with Tableau, but that's kind of why I like spending time in here, because, you know, maybe you can get some ideas that weren't really intended for you. And that's what I like spending my time doing, at least, is kind of pushing the boundaries. So what I do when I come across something that strikes me, I have folders on my desktop that I save all these illustrations to that I can pull from for inspirational color palettes, you know, or maybe it's a layout thing that I like. And here's some dashboard and layout examples from a completely separate folder. So if I'm stuck on how do I organize a bunch of information, I can look through some of these things and get some ideas to put things in positions that I would have never really thought of before. And by doing that, it's allowing me to kind of iterate in my mind and cycle through some options to see what this would look like once we do get down the path of having developed it. And these examples here, I loved, you know, on Medium on the left, I liked the insane amount of white space that was provided. I loved the simple coloring and the cleanliness of that design. And that is something that I borrowed from, because Tableau doesn't encourage white space like that. Tableau would, you know, encourage you to have that chart fill up the entire screen. And so if we can go in with that, that would push our Tableau development in a way that Tableau wasn't expecting it. Same with we see on the right. I love the way that those icons are used, the skinny columns of text. Those can also be replicated in Tableau. You could also go to Interworks' blog, where there is tons of inspiration. One of my favorite things is this thing called Offerings from the Tableau Bar Chart Menu, where you can see all these different ways that we have visualized bar charts and tweaked them. And you can download this workbook and mess with it yourself and copy these things. So highly recommend doing that, even if you're just doing it for trying to reverse engineer it and understand what's going on. Because all of this to say, when we hit this screen in Tableau where we're creating a new sheet, this for me was really like daunting for a while, because I had a major imposter syndrome working at Interworks. I was like, this is too complex for me. I don't know what world this is where everyone can just live and operate off of data. because I did not come from this world, but here I am. This is really intimidating because usually there's like a ton of stuff that you can connect to on the left, and that just overwhelms me. But when we go in with a sketch of what we're hoping to get out as at the end result, a color palette that is striking our fancy, and some solid ideas of other visualizations that have worked well, this thing becomes a lot less intimidating. And that's my goal with this. So then we start to wireframe, and we put these various pieces together to build a prototype to present internally to my teammates and externally to the client to say, is this what you want us to build before we build it? In this example here, I had a client that had 55 KPIs that they wanted on an executive overview screen. And lo and behold, 55 is just way too many things for someone to focus on at one time. So I got them to whittle it down to about 18 things. And once it was in that format, I was able to put all of these metrics on various sticky notes and move them around and see which ones of them fit best, like next to each other. They had to be grouped by the sort of idea and by importance and by kind of like stage setting versus like the meat of the information, why they're going to this dashboard in the first place. So this allowed me to play with the positioning of all these things. And I have a mock-up of what this turned into later in this presentation, so I'll remind you. And then once I kind of have a layout of all of the metrics that we're going to be considering, I do sketch it out every single time. Sometimes I can get bored with it, but because a lot of it is kind of rectangles, like you can see, but it does force me to imagine what could be rather than just letting Tableau dictate what goes on the screen. So highly recommend getting more comfortable with just pen and paper and drawing out these little segments. You don't have to be, like I don't really write much, I just do scribbles, but these things do lead me to discover pitfalls before I even start the design process. But then the design process hits, and I am a huge proponent of this tool called Sketch. It's a screen design tool, and it is what I design all of my dashboards in. A similar tool would be Adobe XD, stands for Experience Design. Adobe XD is free, so I can't knock it for that. Recommend it if you're interested in creating graphics like what you see here, things that will assist your dashboard, layout containers, things like that. Sketch is just really good because it works really seamlessly with another tool that we use called Envision. And Envision is how we share these prototypes with our clients and internally. So Sketch, it's the screen design tool. You can have all sorts of disparate screens. In this example here, this is for an iPhone app. But the gist is that you could have all these different artboards, which in my case would be different dashboards, and those dashboards might be in different filtered states. So like what happens if you click on a dashboard, what's it going to look like with 2 filters applied, those types of things. Then you can wire this all together so that this becomes clickable, and it's a clickable experience that you can link to. And I'm just going to play this sizzle reel of Envision. But this is basically the types of things that you can edit. You can say this screen is supposed to transition like this. The user will click this. Here's how you can get to this screen from all these other disparate screens. Then it pushes it to Envision, where people can comment and have threaded conversations around specific design aspects. And I can't stress enough how helpful that has been, because what it has done is taken what used to be really long conversations in email, and it is now very pointed, and I can follow along with people just complaining about a single color or a button not looking right. And so I'm going to switch over into one of these things really quick. This is a generic dashboard experience like what I would share with a client. And so what's cool about it is, we get to propose things like, client, what if there was an intro screen on your dashboard where we prompted users with full sentences and said, what are you looking for? Would you like to see site studies, principal investigators? And then we prompt them with this experience, like, what if we split up your entire data environment across 3 dashboard experiences where, so we suggest to them, like, you apply some filters, it's going to whittle down the number of locations or materials or contracts you could look at, these being 3 different dashboard experiences. We can say, try this, does this work for you? So sure enough, you can come in here and click on locations. You could imagine what a locations dashboard looks like. This is what I mock up for clients, and we get to run this past them and understand where their questions surface. So in this example, we could say, what would happen if we clicked on one of these recommendation quick filters? Well, I've mocked up this experience so that I can click on recommended, and that filters my content. And I've mocked up this experience also so that I can further filter my content by choosing a specific part of a timeline. Bam, and that changes my content again. And none of this is tied to a data source. This is all fake data. This is all stuff that I have typed in and imagined just to kind of get something in front of people to understand, is this the blueprint we want to go with before we tell all the builders to get out their hammers and start doing this. So we get to mock up this full experience of drilling down to detail pages, going back to overview pages, changing dashboard types, and seeing different metrics just within a single, we're just in this locations. You can add in little toggles. So in this situation, I have it so that we could change this section wasn't quite right. So we could just click this to get an alternate version. And now we can compare the two. Which one is really working better for us? You can mock up what a hover state would look like. So I can say, check out the map on site type C's dashboard and see if the hover state is working properly. Again, not tied to any data here. This is all fictional, and it just gives the developers a clear picture of what they should expect to have at any given time. And it communicates with the client, this is what we are expecting to happen when this happens. And so if we are not on the same page here, talk to us. And we can start using this comment mode where the client could come in here and say, hey, this is completely wrong. Why are you doing that? And then I could respond to them, I was confused, whatever. But this is the type of thing that really does save so much time and gets us out of going back and forth on email. What it's also really good to do is we can iterate really quickly, right? So changing complete styles or color schemes is really easy for me in Sketch. So I can build in things like this toggle here where I can say, hey, client B, go to this homepage mockup and click the toggle and let me know which style is working best for you. And so we can experiment with this and say, is it A or is it B? Why? Which one is working best for which reasons? Maybe we want to be extremely intimidating to these college prep people and we want to scare them before they get into the dashboard. That could be a thing. Or we want to be, friendlier and we want to use full sentences with a bit more consideration on color. This is so important into our process. Another cool thing is there's this inspect mode where our developers can come in here and see what colors I'm using. They can see what fonts I'm using, and they can understand, exactly how to build this thing in whatever which way. And if I've marked things up, they can download these assets directly from here, which is just incredible. There's also a history mode so that we can track revisions as we go through time, and we could go all the way back to when things started and back again, or not. There we go. So yeah, that's InVision, and that's how we share prototypes internally and externally. I'm gonna hop back into my presentation and get on with this. So part 2 of this designing for data, that was all approaching design. And now this next section is the checklist. And so this is something that I've created, and it's kind of a way for us internally to do an audit of client dashboards and internal dashboards. But as we hired new experienced consultants over the last 2 years, this was also kind of a way for us to get on the same page so that we were checking off the same things on a project. So what I'm going to go through on this is really high level. I'm going to make this as quick as possible, but just high level how we think about each of these checklist points. So titles, defining our spaces. We keep titles simple yet descriptive. This is an example from Tableau Public where titles were not structured properly, unfortunately. So if we look here, we have the dashboard title gaps between Black and white communities in the United States. And there's a chart over there on the right, total population 2018 on the left. Our eye is bouncing back and forth, left and right so much. In fact, my illustration for this is everything in white here is a chart title. Everything in green is a block of descriptive text, and everything else is visual analytics. And just looking at this, I think is a whirlwind enough for us to understand that this is too chaotic and there's not much of a semblance of structure here. And so all that I'm suggesting for this first point on the checklist is if we can zoom out of our project and get to a point where we would be able to say, let's not talk about the visualization right now, but just talk about our titles and our subtitles and where other text is going to go. We could build this as a very loose framework, and then it's much easier to see where the visualizations can sit in to assist this layout we've created. So this is, I see it as the very bones of a blueprint. And I'm going back to that house analogy, because we need some sort of semblance of structure before we just start digging stuff up. Call out important stuff. Use annotations, subtitles, and contrast to help narrate your story. So if it helps you to leave in annotations for important points in the data that you don't want anyone to miss, do that. I am a big stickler on subtitles and getting people to add a subline of text underneath a chart title to be super, super clear about how to use it and what's going to happen. And if, I say also use contrast to help narrate the content, because we can use color to drive people's eye to call things out. So in one example that I have here, calling out important stuff, I did with space at the top. I have a lot of white space around those KPIs, overall opportunity amount, opportunities, customers. And by not letting anything else encroach on those KPIs space, I'm saying, pay attention to these things. Nothing is going to step on their feet. These are always going to have this much of space, and it's a bit dominating. It demands that space up there. I'm also using contrast to draw your eye all the way over to the left side of the screen for that filter here button, because in this case, we had new users to Tableau who were not very clear that the power relied on filtering their data and understanding the different slices of it. So we had to draw users over there to get them to use that more. Check your hierarchy. Use text sizes intentionally to create a hierarchy. Try to limit your sizes to 3 sizes and weights. This slide speaks for itself. So what we try to do, these are 3 lines of text that I've just pulled up here in Keynote. I try to, typography can be a really helpful tool in getting a solid design down for your dashboard. And so I try to let people understand that there is a ton of power. If you don't feel like a great designer, you still have a lot of power by just understanding this concept of how to handle a single typeface. You can create a hierarchy with a single typeface by just making a few changes. So a few changes that I would make would be, you can make some lines of copy or some elements bolded and some not. You could change the point size of your font for each of these things. You could introduce some space in between each letter, which is a bit experimental, I will say, but it does define it. These things, it sets it apart from other text elements. I could add in a gray to start to change, contrast of the text. So some of the body copy starts to fade into that gray, while other things could then break the bounding box, which demands even further attention. You could add in a background color behind my chart title so that I'm establishing a system for my users to pay attention to, so that they understand every time they see white text on a blue background, we're introducing a new chart to them. Same typeface, we just have different weights of that typeface and different shades of the same color. And we've established a hierarchy. And the way that this shows up in a dashboard is this example dashboard. And hierarchy shows up in several places. And the way it shows up in text, you can see how my dashboard title, it sits, no other text is styled like that, because it's the only thing that's going to get that treatment. And it's kind of a comforting thing to be like, well, that's the only time we're going to see that. And we don't have to ever use that styling of text unless this is a dashboard title. If the chart title is going to jump us to a new dashboard, if I want people to click that and it taken somewhere, I'm going to teach them that and say, anytime you see blue text with an arrow at the end, that's going to take you to a new dashboard. And again, that doesn't show up anywhere else unless it is taking you to a new dashboard. And then the copy, meaning the way that the data is represented, that's all the same too, so that you always understand, what is clickable and what you can interact with and select a mark type. All of that is going to be presented the same as well. Hierarchy exists in text like that. It also exists in these containers. And this is kind of something I've done in the last couple of years, is have a primary section and a secondary section. So primary content would be what I want, with the reason that people visited the dashboard in the first place. They're going to see all of the information and data in the primary container, but it's going to be supported by stuff in a secondary container that I don't really want to drive the conversation. And that's going to even be further backed up with a tertiary section that's below that. So things that you really shouldn't interact with, but it is just kind of clarifying that we are looking at the same things, and it's building up a little bit of trust in our data so that we can see different aspects of it instead of just one. I'm also using color here to establish hierarchy. Notice that there is a slight gray background. This allows me to have a white container that introduces the most contrast for my data. And that then allows me to use gray over there on the right to further push stuff into the background. I'm also using color to indicate where things are going to jump you to a new dashboard. And I'm also using color to indicate the status of a metric, if it's below or above budget, the teal and the red. Moving on to the next item on the checklist. This is the simplest one on here. Make sure your axes are aligned. Really just making sure that your X and Ys are all the same. I probably see this more often with disparate horizontal bar charts not being lined up vertically. And so the starts of the bars kind of end up all over the place, creating a zigzag. It's not much, and it's not going to make or break a dashboard, but these types of things do add trust to the data, and it lets people feel like everything is working as intended and things aren't breaking. This is what a more finalized product would look like if these axes are all aligned and we are acknowledging the grid that is kind of keeping this whole thing in structure. Logical chart placement. I said this earlier, but I like to introduce with the beginning, educate with stuff in the middle, and then encourage someone to do something with the end. And so that usually doesn't involve that big anvil, just kind of like, taking over your attention first and foremost. I think that would be kind of assaulting. But I will reference hierarchy again on that dashboard that we were just looking at. This is chart placement. I am demanding that people look at what is in the primary content by having these containers. And then I also want them to focus on what's over there in that gray box. And then lastly, the map. They don't need to interact with the map. It is really just reacting to other things that they're doing in the primary section. And this, you can see this again. This was that dashboard that had 55 metrics on it originally that we got down to 18. But it might look like there's a lot going on. There is. But if we break it apart, we can understand this section here, this main section with the largest charts on it, that's kind of the bulk, that's the middle. So this is why someone comes to this dashboard: regional market locations, the main campus, visitor locations. But we are introducing the subject with these high-level KPIs. So we're kind of getting people familiar with it. Here's some high-level stats that will inform what we read in the bulk of data. And then we have sort of an end. There's not really a call to action here, but the end is, these are supplementary stats. These are stats that no one is going to make decisions off of, but they're, you know, supporting and empowering everything else that's going on the dashboard. So yeah, giving the main real estate to the stuff that people are going to be making decisions based off of, I think, is the key there. Graphics placed sparingly. So all I really have to say about that is try to limit the amount of shapes being brought in. And if you do, make sure they have a good function. So usually when you bring in shapes, they're going to be from an icon set. We use a tool called the Noun Project, and it is amazing at getting lots of icon ideas in front of us in a quick pace. But then we do end up editing those icons so that we can have our own versions of them that are more custom and fit our spaces better. But I think overall, the easiest summation is if you have an icon or a set of icons in a dashboard, just make sure that they all align stylistically. So in this case, all of these are lined icons, save for 2 in that bottom row. They're filled. I believe you can find those. But yeah, don't, you know, go to Google and just search for home icon and then do another Google search for user icon, because they're going to come from different places. And even though it's small, people will understand, or they will notice that, you know, these have been ripped, or it doesn't really feel like it's coming from home base or the client, if you will. Another way that we use imagery is for background images. And so this allows us to kind of paint a setting for the data to exist on top of. And so by doing this outside of Tableau, we then get the benefit of these extra styling elements. So like the subtle shadows behind these containers, the different mark types, the icons that allow you to click on one of those to take you to a different analysis of that primary metric. And then those filter icons at the top, we have 2 different types of filters. And so all of this is one image that we were able to bake into a background that allowed us to sit all of this information on, and it gave it this sort of presence that we wouldn't have really been able to achieve in Tableau without this element. And so this is kind of introducing the grid, it's introducing the color palette, and it kind of, you know, gives us these shapes for the data to sit on top of. Accessibility, use color intentionally and be aware of colorblind pitfalls. So I recommend this site called Color Supply because you can browse based on color theory and you can find things that are close to each other or really far apart from each other on the color palette, which is great for when we're, you know, trying to find color palettes for a range of things, or if each color has to be disparate from each other because we want everyone to understand that these things are not related at all, and these are very different metrics, or maybe they are related and we need to have them existing in a range of blues. I like doing this because it allows me to get out of my design tool for a little bit and spin this color wheel around and find something, and I end up screenshotting that and dragging that into my workspace. You can also test your color combinations all sorts of different ways. I found this crazy link. This is a tool that someone built, and I like it. You basically can just type in your 2 different hex codes, or you can play around with it and get some color combinations that you might not come up with on your own. But it's kind of nice to be able to have these things created, which is great for pushing out, you know, experimental color palettes to a client and be like, well, it's might be experimental, but it does pass. And if we're going for, you know, a new branded analytics, then we might want to test these colors first in a setting like this. I think the safest thing that we have realized at Enderworks, though, is to ask people and to watch people use these dashboards and understand where they get frustrated. So usually when I send over one of those prototypes, I encourage the users to click around, and I want to see when they click on something and it doesn't work like they intended it to. Same for if we skip that prototype method altogether and we're just talking Tableau straight up. I build in a dashboard. I want to get this in front of them and see where they get frustrated, because those little frustrations are going to help me answer the design to make it more accessible. And when there's any doubt, lean towards simplicity. Intentional lines and borders. So excessive lines such as grid lines, borders, or tick marks add clutter. Eliminate them and only add back in the ones that are necessary to consume the content. So in this case, I find the borders that Tableau puts around charts to be too bold and distracting. And I don't see any reason that our eyes should even spend time focusing on these pixels that I've highlighted in red. And so my encouragement is to remove all sorts of borders that Tableau throws your way and to replace that with white space. So bring in more dead space, or white space, to add in a buffer between your columns, and people won't really notice. This is kind of like a invisible design element, but the human eyes will love just that little bit of extra breathing room. And I don't know, I think it's an easy switch. So I encourage you to add more white space instead of borders. The final point on this checklist is to add value where possible. So in this example, it's kind of a stretch example, but these KPIs I think are really hard to understand. It's hard to see the ranking of each of them to understand where the majority is in all of them. It also took me a little while to realize that there's 18,002 upcoming ops, and there's also 18,002 things reflected in deal size and in segment and in product group. I don't know, it just seems kind of not super clear that it is breaking down the same number and it is split all these different ways. Also, the color isn't telling us anything. So what I've done is I actually took out all of those distracting KPIs, because for some reason people love a donut chart. I am going to push people toward a bar chart when possible, because what I like over here on this left is now we have it very clear that each of those groups do equal out to 18,002, but then you can see the split by rank. So you can see the largest segment of each of those, I guess each line item, you can see each line item of each of these segments ranked. And this is also now in the same area where I'm telling people to click the filter button, because in that filter button, there are extra filters hidden, but they could also click on any of these things that used to be a complicated donut chart, and these will also filter the content. So they could choose one thing from forecast category, one thing from deal size, one thing from segment, and one thing from product group. All of this is adding up to influence everything else that is to the right of the page, or to the right of that filter bar, I suppose. So that's the checklist. That is something that we can email out. It is also on our blog, where there's an article written about each of those principles that I just talked about. So coming up on an hour, I just have a few more things to discuss. So this is taking it further. After we've gone through the checklist, what else can we do to get a better dashboard? Maybe the checklist just isn't your thing and you're just not really into it. Well, our answer is to collaborate with someone, to experiment and try things that I suggest trying stupid things just to get it out of the way. And then once you start trying some stupid things, you get to try some things that are closer to the answer. And I think any failed experiments are okay because it is getting us closer to an answer. And then ask your peers for critique. This is super simple, but if you can buy into the idea of iterating often, instead of trying an experimental sheet or worksheet, I encourage you to right-click your Tableau workbook file and duplicate it and create a second experimental copy. This way, you don't have all these sheets getting clustered up into a single workbook where some things have the style applied and some things don't. And sometimes the sheet is pulled into your dashboard and sometimes it's not. If you can just do that on a completely separate workbook, then you can more likely to have, you can have 2 different laptops open and test that. Or you can send someone 2 different links and say, check out this one and then check out this one. Let me know which one is speaking to you better and why. And it's not, users are going to be reluctant to give you all of those answers just from experience. And so that's why we say, watch people use this, be on the screen with them or be next to them when they're clicking through this to understand which one they're gravitating more toward and which one they're steering away from. This is how our consultants get better at building up their design confidence, is by doing this, testing one versus the other. Because even if we do have a good looking dashboard that has good use of color and very good use of white space, we've gone through the checklist on it, what would happen if we wanted to give this dashboard to someone else and you say, hey, I've gone through the checklist, why don't you go through the checklist and see what you find? You could come up with a completely different design where your colors are totally different and you realize that you're missing out on some iconography that could serve as great KPIs for asset performance. Or you could say, hey, over here, you do the checklist again. And then we discover that all those lines, those needed to be small multiples and we're not going to show them on the same chart because the numbers are too different. And by the way, you're missing an entire mapping component. Or we do it a 4th time and we realize that we need to offload some branding assets to a web environment. So getting a curator instance, which would allow us to have more branded material, more graphic elements, a more customized user experience. We could offload some filters to the curator environment. We could have other brand materials here. We wouldn't get to this page we wouldn't get to this result if we didn't go through the iteration process again and again, and by sourcing it to our different members on the team to get various inputs and have them run through the checklist. The reasons that we do all of this, it's not just for fun. It is because I want the people that I work with, the consultants that I work with, I want them to feel really proud of the work they do, that they're so proud that they go home and they talk about it at night or they tell their friends about it. I want them to be that proud of the stuff that they get to work on. I also want our clients to feel that proud of it because we are this is a creation for them and we do get to create new things for them. So it's an opportunity for excitement. And, I think that we can make something that's enjoyable that leads into simplifying the user experience. I want to surface up answers for people. So reducing the number of clicks that they have to get to the answer they're looking for, that's what I want to do. I want to bring them answers easier. And then possibly bring someone a little bit of joy, because I think that, scouring huge amounts of data isn't just innately tons of fun, but if we can design it in a great way and we make it easy and enjoyable, then there is no reason that we cannot try to bring a little bit of joy into these experiences. So that is the goal of the experience department at Interworks. So that's the end of my talk. This is the checklist that we will send out a link to, or email or something. We'll figure that out. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you're having a great Wednesday, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Here are some of the things that I talked about. If you would like a screenshot to look these up later or whatever, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions whatsoever. Happy to help.
Great, thanks, David. Just very quick, is there anyone that has any open questions? I know that we had a few folks ask some questions throughout the presentation, and we answered those as we went. But if you have any questions here at the last few minutes, let us know. Otherwise, as David said, what we'll do is we'll send out via Splash to any of the registrations the link to the presentation, along with the YouTube link to the recording once that goes live.
Oh,
all right.
Thanks for the compliment, Ron. When do we recommend asking stakeholders for input on the design? Usually right at the very beginning, so I can understand if there's any sort of brand guidelines, like maybe there's a style guide that is new that marketing put out and I need to adhere to their color palette or design language. That'll greatly influence what I do. But then I do like to take a step back and say, okay, here's the data that this person is trying to show. Here's what I suggest that this could look like. And so I will spend maybe 10 hours or so working on pulling all these various pieces together. And then I send back my prototype to the stakeholders, and I ask for their input on the design at that point. And so I say, thank you for this intro design stuff, but now that I've applied this with some of my own considerations and your color palette, is this headed in the right direction? And depending on how much they trust you, and depending on how much they're willing to hand over as far as their design styles go, then those conversations will vary. What other charts do I recommend to use in combination with maps and a dashboard? Dang. A lot of maps I tend to shrink a touch because I feel like it's hard to see all the points on a map. And I think maps do great when they have a few lists associated with them. So if you can maybe add in, well, actually, I can probably. Like this here's a map that, this was a general, I pulled this up earlier, but there's 3 different main things we're looking for on the map, different types of places. But the problem is there could be a lot of different types of places in the same city. So what happens when those dots get on top of each other? It's not my favorite solution, but this mock-up has the idea to show the percentage breakout of each of these types. But notice how so much more emphasis is now put on the list of each of these things. So my encouragement would be to add in a list like this, where this is easier for us to understand the ranking of things. So I could say, I just want to see a single city, or I could flip this. So instead of a city list, I could do a different type of list. That way it's kind of giving me some options as to how I navigate closer to the things I'm looking for. So rather than trying to just have the map do all the work itself, I definitely try to add in things beside it to help understand what's going on.
And I'm typing up a longer answer here on this question. I was hoping to get it answered by the time you were finished there.
Nice.
So,
cool. Well, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, anyone, if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll use the Slack platform to send out not just the reference material from this talk, but also the information about the next session whenever Sean's back. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.